Hello, boys. Hello, girls. Hello, babes. Welcome back to the Janae Talks Caps podcast. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in today. And we would like to invite you, if you haven't already done so, to please go ahead and subscribe to our podcast. If you like what we're doing here, if you enjoy the show, we would love to have you along for this ride with us. A ride that we hope will not end after the Caps' last regular season game, although unfortunately that does appear to be growing more and more likely by the day with each game that passes here without the Caps getting the 2 standings points. So, our Washington Capitals getting our hopes up and then subsequently squashing those hopes like a bug on the windshield here. That is where we are at right now. 6 straight losses for our Capitals right now, albeit a couple of them were in overtime and the shootout, so they at least got 1 standings point in each of those ones. So that's a little bit of a saving grace, as believe it or not, the Caps, even after 6 straight losses, they are still in kind of an okay position to still at least try and make the playoffs here. In fact, they sit just 1 point out of a playoff spot at the time that I'm recording this episode here. And they are also, by the way, just 2 points back of the 3rd place position in the Metropolitan Division. So that is obviously another potential point of entry into the Stanley Cup playoffs as well. But still, like the vibes from the fan base right now after 6 straight losses are not good, man. They're not good. And understandably so, losing 6 straight games is never going to be considered a good thing, no matter if the games are lost in regulation or in overtime or the shootout. And even though the Caps are still right there in terms of the playoff picture, it is extremely frustrating right now. That they've lost these 6 games at a time when they could have really separated themselves from the pack, quite frankly, in terms of, having a leg up on these other teams that are fighting for playoff spots right now. As none of these teams right now in the Eastern Conference that are fighting for these playoff spots, none of them have really been able to do that, right? Have really been able to pull away. A lot of these teams right now are actually losing a lot of games or, kind of win one, lose one at best, most of them. So, the Caps, even if the Caps had even gone 500, let's say, over these last 6 games, even if they had won 2 of these last 6 games, 2-2 or something like that, because like I mentioned, they have lost 2 of these 6 losses have been past regulation, so they've got a couple of points that way. But even if they were like 2-2, just 2 wins even over those 6 games, that's 500 hockey. They would still be in a much better spot right now, with much better odds of making the playoffs. So instead, they have made it a lot harder on themselves, and every game now, from now until the end of the regular season, is going to be pretty much a must-win situation right now for the Washington Capitals. And that absolutely starts, by the way, with Tuesday night's game in Detroit. That is a huge game. So let's talk through this thing here. Let's have a bit of therapy, if you will. All of us here together right now. Let's work this thing out. Let's figure out what has happened here, where it's going wrong right now for our Washington Capitals, and let's just talk through this thing, shall we? Because first of all, at the start of this season, okay, no one thought that the Washington Capitals were even going to be able to be in this position where they're fighting for a playoff spot this late in the season, where they actually have a real shot at making the playoffs. So first of all, let's get this out of the way right now. They deserve a lot of credit for getting themselves to this point, for exceeding outside expectations, and it is admirable. It really is what they've been able to fight through and overcome this season. This team right now is a lot higher in the standings than any of the pundits predicted, and that is a credit to the players and to the coaching staff. And so I think, big picture, right? If you had told any Caps fan at the beginning of the season that we would still very much be in the thick of the playoff picture on April 9th, I think probably all Caps fans would have taken that. Secondly, there are positives to be drawn even from the team's struggles right now, and especially when you look at how and why they are struggling. Because it's not the veteran players who are still here who are struggling right now, right? Like Alex Ovechkin has been absolutely on fire. He's been the best player on the ice most nights, and he is scoring at a nearly 60 goal pace since returning from the All-Star break healthy. He is a huge reason why the Caps have been able to climb back into this playoff race at all to begin with. John Carlson has been playing absolutely massive minutes and has been able to come up extremely clutch in a number of situations recently as well. TJ Oshie and Tom Wilson have both been in and out of the lineup for different reasons, but when they have been in, they have been good as well. In my opinion, what we're seeing with the Caps right now, these last 6 games or so, is the young kids on the team just being a bit overwhelmed by the moment, right? And being a little bit overwhelmed by that playoff style NHL level hockey, because we know that these guys can play and perform well in playoff situations, right? Like they did it last season in the AHL with the Hershey Bears. They won the Calder Cup. But NHL level playoff style hockey is obviously a level up, right? It's a few levels up. And so they're getting used to that right now. And they do appear right now like they're in that kind of growing pain phase, right? Where they're getting used to it, but it's not going to happen quick enough maybe for the Caps to make the playoffs this season, which is completely fine, by the way. It almost never does happen that quickly for any player. They're very young, and this is how they will learn. And getting this experience right now of being in a true playoff race so early in their NHL careers is going to serve them, and therefore the team, the organization, is going to serve them very well moving forward into next season and beyond. That is exactly why I really, really, really wanted the Caps to claw back into this playoff race this season and to be playing in these meaningful games down the stretch. It's not necessarily because I truly think that we have a real shot at winning the Stanley Cup this year, although I understand and acknowledge that anything can happen if you do get in, if you do get into the playoffs. But rather for me, the desire to get back into this playoff race was more so about how I think it could help us win the Cup down the road by getting these young players this experience now. The more big game experience that these guys get early on in their careers, the longer our window to win another Stanley Cup is going to be, because it's going to be opened up, that window is, earlier by these guys having that experience and knowing what it takes to win big games at the NHL level and being ready for that. Now, unfortunately, it has not helped one bit for this season's hopes of making the playoffs that while these young players are being overwhelmed a little bit right now, and while we were already down leaders and veteran players like Nicklas Backstrom and Evgeny Kuznetsov, it doesn't help, certainly, that at the same time, TJ Oshie also goes out of the lineup with injury again. Tom Wilson gets suspended, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list just goes on and on and on for this team, it seems, over the past few seasons, really, in terms of injuries and things like that. A lot of adversity, and, these things certainly, like I said, they haven't helped the situation or helped these young kids to feel insulated, not having that veteran leadership presence, if you will, in the lineup. It's been a very, very young lineup for the Capitals for the majority of this last stretch of games here where they've really been struggling. And that's, like I said, it's a lot of veteran leadership that's missing from your lineup right now, or rather over this last stretch of games here. Wilson obviously back from his suspension now. Hopefully that'll help. Oshie, I believe, it does look like he might be able to play in the game in Detroit, so that would obviously be a big boost, hopefully, as well. But yeah, it's been a lot of veteran leadership that's been missing from your lineup for this last stretch of games here, and I do think that we are seeing the effects of that. It's certainly not ideal timing to be missing the usually very calming presences of TJ Oshie and Tom Wilson in your lineup, that's for sure. But like I said, it does sound like Oshie might be able to return for Tuesday night's game in Detroit. So here's hoping that might provide a spark and help get this thing turned around and rolling back in the right direction once again. They have to fix this fast if they want to get into the playoffs. There's no doubt about that. The runway is getting extremely short here. There is very little margin for error here at this point now. They've pretty much burned up all of that margin for error at this point, quite frankly. So like they're all going to be pretty much must-win games now from this point on. So we will see what they can do with it starting Tuesday night in Detroit. Like I said, that's obviously a massive, massive game. I think if you lose that one in regulation to a team that, you know, you're fighting with for that wild card spot potentially, that's going to be very tough to come back from. So it is a huge game Tuesday night in Detroit. And yeah, I mean, like I did want to cover some of the positives that we can take from this experience right now, this stretch run, whether we get in or not, right? Like I just kind of wanted to just take a deep breath here and provide a bit of perspective for people, remind people that, hey, you know, the Caps were never supposed to be in this position anyway. Like they were never supposed to be in the playoffs this season. If you believed all of the so-called experts of our sport, right? They were never supposed to be here. They were never supposed to even be in this position where they even have a chance to make the playoffs. So whether we get in or not, at the end of the day, come game 82, there are going to be positives that we can take from this stretch run, from playing these meaningful games down the stretch, that are, you know, positives that are going to benefit the team down the line. So yeah, that's the positive, because I don't want to come on here and just be all negative all the time, because it is not all doom and gloom here, even though I definitely understand that it certainly feels that way right now when you look at these last 6 games, and the lack of standings points over those 6 games specifically. But I mean, the future is still bright, folks, and that's the truth. However, with all of that being said, it is also the truth that it has been extremely disappointing how these last 6 games have unfolded here. So 2 things can be true, right? It is true that the future of this team and this organization is very bright. That is true. And it is also true that these last 6 games have sucked, and they have had many of us questioning our sanity, quite frankly. So 2 things can be true. And looking ahead, you know, the Caps have a tough remaining schedule. They do. So it's not going to be easy by any means if they want to get into the playoffs. Securing a ticket to the dance is going to require them playing a whole lot better than they have over these last 6 games, for sure. Their remaining games are in, like I said, it's starting Tuesday night in Detroit, and then in Buffalo, and then home to face the Lightning and the Bruins, and then they finish the season off by traveling to play the second half of a back-to-back against what will be a rested Flyers team in Philadelphia. So that's a tough stretch of hockey. It would be my guess that in order to make the playoffs, the Caps are going to have to win 4 of their remaining 5 games, or you might be able to get away with winning 3 of 5, so long as 2 of those 3 wins are coming in the games against the Red Wings and the Flyers. But you definitely do not want to lose those 2 games for sure. No pressure though. So the things that I am going to be watching for over these last 5 games of the regular season here is just who's going to be able to step up with the big goal, right? Other than Alex Ovechkin, because we know Ovi's been scoring at a monstrous pace down the stretch here. He's really been trying to just will this team into the playoffs against all odds. But what I want to see is someone else stepping up to help him, right? And if we can get that down the stretch here, then that is going to vastly increase our chances of making it to the dance. Like, we know Alex Ovechkin is going to show up in these moments just as he always has. I would expect him fully to show up Tuesday night in Detroit. But let's see who else steps up, right? Like, that's what I'm going to be really interested in, is who else is it? Who else can step up? Who else can help Ovi out in these moments? Because it can't just be one guy pulling on the rope, right? It's got to be everybody if you want to get into the playoffs. So that's one thing that I'm going to be watching for. I'm going to be very interested in that for sure. And then the other thing that I'm going to be interested in, I would assume that, like, assuming that he doesn't get injured, right? That Charlie Lindgren is going to be starting games 78 through 81 for the Caps for sure. But I'm interested to see if they do get to game 82 against the Flyers, and if that game still matters, then is it going to be a situation where they're playing Chucky in both halves of that back-to-back? Or would they actually trust Darcy Kuemper with that final game of the season, with the playoffs potentially on the line? Like, that's going to be very interesting to me if it comes down to it, because Darcy Kuemper, he actually did play pretty well in his most recent outing, even though the Caps took the loss to Carolina in that one. But I think for a lot of people, and including maybe for the Capitals coaching staff, one good outing doesn't erase a whole season's worth of piss poor performances and shitty goals against, right? Which is why I would be very interested to see if they trust Kuemper with that game if it comes down to it. I think that'll be fascinating, quite frankly, if it happens. And hey, hopefully it does happen, right? Because if we are playing game 82 of the regular season with the chance to get into the playoffs with a victory, I think we would all take that. Having that opportunity in the very last game of the season, we would all take that, right? I'm sure we would. We'll just have to make sure that the liquor cabinet is properly stocked, because holy hell. Anyways, Caps fans, that is going to be it for this one. I wanted to thank you all again so much for listening. It's a shorter episode this week, just simply because, we've had a 6-game losing streak. We don't really have a ton of positives to talk about. We're trying to keep the vibes good for you Capitals fans right now, for ourselves and for the rest of Capitals fans, just because there's so much negativity going around out there right now. But we want to try to keep it a little bit more positive on this show for the time being, just to kind of try to keep the vibes up, good juju. Let's try to get this thing turned around. The Caps do have a big opportunity with the game Tuesday night in Detroit. One victory can turn it all around, when the victory is against a team that you're directly battling for that last playoff spot, that last wild card spot, right? And the Caps, like I said, they do have another path in potentially with third place in the Metropolitan Division. So there's a couple of points of entry for the Caps still to get into the playoffs. But yeah, it can all turn around when you have these games against these teams that you were directly battling with for playoff spots. It can all turn around when you're all that close to each other in the standings with just one victory. So that is what we will be hoping for Tuesday night in Detroit. That would be massive. That would get the Caps right back in it. It would vault them back into a playoff spot. It would, again, have them controlling their own destiny to get into the playoffs at the end of the day. So that is what we will be hoping for Tuesday night in Detroit. We hope you will all be watching along with us. And yeah, thank you all again so much for listening. And hey, I know I said it already, but please do not forget to subscribe to our podcast if you do enjoy the show, which I'm assuming you do, right? Because you are still here listening right at the very end. And we appreciate it so much, by the way. Like, you all are what make this show so much fun to do. And I always appreciate the comments. I always appreciate the questions. I always appreciate the reviews. I appreciate it all so much. And so until next time, babes, hopefully the next time that we chat, our Caps will be in a playoff spot after a big victory in Detroit. That is what we're hoping for. But until then, and in the words of the great Alexander Ovechkin, get some beers, get some whatever, enjoy the game Tuesday night against the Red Wings. It is a big one. And as always, babes, let's go Caps.